Hey guys, this is Neela here. I'm going to show you how to import Apex assets into Blender. So in the previous video, we extracted all the Apex assets using Legion. We have an OBJ file and a bunch of textures. So first of all, let's just open up Blender and delete all of that. So you want to go to File, Import, and OBJ. Navigate to your folder, exported files, models. We're going to be working on the Wingman, of course. You go in there, you import the OBJ, and here we are. So you see, first of all, we have the gun, we have a bunch of scopes and a gigantic suppressor. Today we'll be working on the Wingman itself and the digital threat optic. So we can just select it from the little navigation pane over there. Just select the both of them, Control I to invert the selection, X to delete the current selection, which is everything else. Let's switch to shading view now that we've isolated what we're working with. So you want to go back to that folder and then navigate to images, and you have all your textures. So I'm going to be moving in the textures one by one. Unfortunately, you'll notice that the names aren't exactly conducive to being read by human beings. It's all in hex, I think. So just loading in all the textures that match up. This will take you a while, of course. You're going to have to figure out which texture goes where. So we're looking for basically an albedo texture, which is just the color. And we're looking for the specular. We're going to set the specular to non-color data every time. So what we want to do, first of all, is to connect the color, the albedo texture, to the base color of the principal shader. This will give us just a very flat looking colored weapon. We can do better than this. Let's go. So what we're going to do now is connect the color of the specular to the roughness of the principal shader. And you'll see immediately there's a change in how the shader looks. Some of it is glossy, some of it is not. So I want to tone down that gloss a bit. So I'm going to add a color ramp node and change the black to be a bit lighter. So we're changing the roughness from 0, which is black, to a bit higher, say like 0.6, 0.7, which would be a lightish gray. All right, that looks much better. So next we're going to add a vector bump node, and we're going to connect the color of the specular to the height of the bump node. Oh, that's amazing. Let's tone that down a bit, make it 0.1 on the strength and 0.1 on the distance. There we go. And we can connect that up to the normal of the principal shader. Let me just toggle that with M so you can see what a difference that makes. And that's our basic shader. So I'm going to speed through doing the same exact thing for the scope. So the scope has an extra texture. It's the emission texture. It has the color and the position of the lights on the scope. We're going to just preview that. All right. So in order to show this emission, we're going to add an emission shader. And we're going to connect the color output of the emission texture to the color input of the emission shader. It doesn't look very different, but we'll get there. So now we want to mix this emission with the principled shader that we had before. So we're going to add a mix shader. Now we want to control what is light and what is just texture. And we're going to use the color of the emit as a factor. First, let's switch it to black and white by using a hue saturation value node. Set the saturation to 0, set the value to above 1, like 1.7, maybe 2. And that will give you a crisp line between white and black, which is what we're looking for. So we can connect that up to the factor. So we're going to want to switch these shaders around with Alt-S. And that'll give us the look that we're going for. All right, so that should be our basic shaders done for now. So let's just tab into edit mode on the Wingman here. You'll notice that the faces are not actually connected. They're all separate. you can pull them away. The vertices aren't actually attached to each other. So what you want to do is select all with A, press space, and use remove doubles to connect all the vertices that are close to each other. I'm just going to use an edge split modifier to fix that shading right there. So let me do the same thing again for the scope. Now I have something planned for the scope. So I don't like how this glass looks. So I'm just gonna cut out very quickly with the knife tool using C to snap to 90-degree angles. Just gonna extrude that out a bit there. So we're gonna separate this piece and then get rid of it. And on the back here that has some funny connections, we can just separate that and get rid of it. Alright, so I'm gonna select these two edges right here. Shift S cursor to selected. And now that the 3D cursor is right there, we're going to add a cube. And this is going to be the new glass for the scope. We're going to add a different glass material. And this is all just basic 3D modeling. If you're on this video, you probably know all this stuff. So we're going to add a quick glass shader. Eevee doesn't do real-time glass very well. It just approximates it. You can mess around with that window there and see if that works for you. Blender usually just crashes when I try messing around with that, so I'm just gonna avoid that. Let's switch to cycles because Eevee worked great so far, but we want something that looks slightly realistic. So let me just set up a bunch of lights because it looks quite dark. So I'm just gonna drop in a quick HDRI from my library and add a couple of sun lamps, angle them in place, add a camera, position that, and hit render. Alright, so that's a start. Now we can do a bit better on the emission and the shadows right there. We're gonna have to add a couple more passes to the render. So we're gonna go to this little window here and check emission and ambient occlusion. And let's switch to compositing and do a quick render so that those extra passes are on our render layers. And you see there that we have the image, the alpha, depth, AO, and emit passes. So we're gonna mix the image and AO first of all. Let's set that to multiply. And you can toggle this with M and compare the difference. So let's add another mix node to put the emit with the multiply and set that to screen. And we want to blur this for that glowy effect. So we can add a file output node, point it to our desktop and hit render. And there you go.